Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mara Gittleman. I am the Workshops and Education Coordinator for GreenThumb. We are the office of the New York City Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. I'm so thrilled to be here with Mike from Partnerships for Parks and Dee from Citizens Committee from New York City, who will introduce themselves in a bit. And we're just thrilled that everyone could join us and be here with us today. GreenThumb is super grateful for all of the work that you all do to keep your community gardens thriving and amazing, especially during these very trying times. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here. We are recording this and we'll make it available to you afterwards to review. And so you can keep your camera off if you choose, but we will have the recording focused on just the 3 speakers. And then later we'll go into breakout rooms that won't be recorded. So we'll invite everyone to head to the chat to introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, what garden you're from, neighborhood you're tuning in from, anything you want to share with us. And otherwise, we're going to stay muted for the duration of the webinar so that we can hear our presenters until it's time to head to those breakout rooms. And I'm also going to put, there's a worksheet for this webinar that I emailed out, and I will also put it in the chat if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So welcome everyone. We're so excited that you're here. And without further ado, I'll pass the mic to, I don't know, who's speaking first, Dee or Mike?
Hi, Mara, I think I am. Good evening, everyone. Mike Mullaley here at Partnerships for Parks. I oversee our technical assistance programs, like our small grants and public workshops and a variety of other resources which we'll touch on. So yeah, we'll give a quick overview first. So Partnerships for Parks is a joint program of the New York City Parks Department and the nonprofit City Parks Foundation. So we are a joint program, been around for about 25 years. And our focus is we support and champion a growing network of leaders who care and advocate for the neighborhood parks and green spaces. We equip people with and organizations and people within government with skills and tools that they need to transform these spaces into dynamic community assets. So as Mara mentioned, that GreenThumb is a program within the division of the Parks Department. Partnerships Parks is in that same division, so we are colleagues on many levels. How we support community volunteers across New York City in terms of supporting their parks and playgrounds and different park spaces. We do that in a variety of ways. The most basic way to work with us at Partnerships for Parks is to hold, at least historically, right, has been to hold volunteer like cleanup projects in parks, beautification projects, planting. So maybe you live near a park, maybe you're a seasoned park steward at this time, but a basic way to work with us is you organize some people to get together, work with us so we can connect you with tools and other resources to hold a park cleanup project completely free of charge. So we connect you to tools and resources through the Parks Department to do that. Similar to GreenThumb, there are outreach coordinators in all the boroughs. So we would want to connect you to your closest outreach coordinator to get to know, just who serves as a kind of a liaison, a point person between the Parks Department and the goings on in your community and how to get connected more with your park space, maybe get to know different staff within the Parks Department, like your park manager and a variety of other people to help get to know how you can care for that space and get more involved. We also support people and volunteers through a variety of means, as I mentioned, through small grants, which we'll spend a bit of time talking about, funding today. We also provide, similar to this platform today, trainings on a variety of topics for community park leaders. We also provide one-on-one coaching and other types of support like community visioning and helping groups envision what they want, how they want to see their space and work with their community and maybe advocate for larger capital funding projects and whatnot.
Great, thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Dee. I work for Citizens Committee for New York City. We are a nonprofit organization that supports community improvement projects throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. We were founded in the 1970s during the fiscal crisis. That was a time when many city services were shut down. So our co-founders, Oz Elliott and Jacob Javis, thought that regular New Yorkers could help each other. So they put out ads in the New York Times and called for volunteers to help patrol the street and clean up the blocks. Thousands of residents signed up to help care for the city. And taking the torch from these pioneering community leaders, we continue to support New Yorkers to improve the quality of life in their neighborhoods through our grant programs, workshops, technical assistance, and other resources. Next slide, please. So today I'd like to highlight 2 ongoing grant programs. The Always Neighborhood Grant, which is rebranding of our legacy grant program, Neighborhood Grant, if you're familiar with us, and our Neighborhood Business Grants, which was part of our response to COVID-19. I'll be elaborating more on these grant opportunities towards the end of this presentation. I'd also like to introduce you to our newly started Citizens NYC Live series, which is our virtual programs that started after the pandemic, since we still hope to continue to stay connected with our network and promote the amazing work on the ground. I've listed 2 of the programs in this series that you can get connected to us. Rethink and Rebuild, which is a Facebook Live event that brings together a panel of experts, community leaders together to focus on different topics that are on the mind of our network. We've covered COVID responses, education, census, voting, small businesses, entrepreneurship, as well as youth leadership. In the January panel that just happened, we had 3 mayoral candidates to talk about civic engagement and accountability. Neighborhood Chat is an informal virtual community gathering, which offers an open discussion on quality of life issues faced by New Yorkers. Facilitated by our CEO, Dr. Rosanne Harris, and our program staff, this series provides an opportunity for grantee partners and other stakeholders to come together to discuss how they can all come together to help rebuild New York City. And all of these past programs can be watched through our YouTube channel. So I strongly encourage you to check them out. Next slide, please. So Mara, Mike, and I will be elaborating more on the grant opportunities at our own organizations later. But even though we work for different programs and there are different grant programs that we offer, there are also different funding opportunities out there with different requirements. Grant applications aren't that different from each other. They all touch on some similar aspects and expect you to tell a compelling story of your project and demonstrate your capacity to carry it out. So today we want to leave you with some tools that can help you with general grant writing practices and your fundraising efforts. Next slide, please. So we'll start with a basic question of tell us about your group, which is usually at the top of a grant application. This is where you will discuss your group's overall purpose and mission, the history and accomplishments. When was your group formed and why was it formed? What do you do and why do you do it? Elaborating on the significance of your work, whether it's filling a service gap or promoting equity. You could also talk about the main group members and target audience. Who are these people and how are they involved? For example, Sunshine Garden was started in 2010 by 3 long-term residents of the community. The garden was originally an empty lot that served as a dumping ground. In 2018, 3 long-term residents were sick of seeing a garbage pile and got their community members together to clear it out. In the garden's first year, the group has built 3 raised beds and led 2 workshops on growing food. You could see that in this example, it is really succinct and to the point. You can talk more about if your group has a longer story, but try to keep this section short.
All right, project description. So as Dee mentioned, it doesn't really matter. These are a lot of similar questions that come up regarding of whether it's COVID or not, or whether COVID is not happening. So just some things for people to be aware of. So project description, often what we're looking for here is for people to be outlining the details of their group's proposed project. So really basically, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to hold a program? you want to do a park cleanup? You're looking to build raised beds in a garden? You know, like what is the thing that you're looking to do? And be clear with that. And then from there, you know, we're looking for a little more detail then. So if you're holding an event, and obviously there are certain guidelines that we'll talk more about that people should be mindful of in holding events during COVID. But, you know, are you holding multiple events? You know, what's the frequency of it? You know, how is your project structured? Do you need certain materials to go along with it? How will you implement it? These are all important questions to consider and to build into your project description. And as I mentioned, you know, implementation is particularly important during COVID and what's happening right now. So, you know, how's your group? How are you interacting in the space? How are you being safe? You know, we definitely want to know that. You know, are projects that you're proposing, have they been approved by the Parks Department? You know, if you want to do something in a park, is it, you know, with the guidelines, with the city, state, you know, how the Parks Department is kind of the rules they kind of are outlining, has it been approved by GreenThumb? You know, I know there's certain things that people can do in gardens or not do. So just making sure that either you've checked in with your outreach coordinator, right, and asked and just to make sure that the project you're proposing could be approved, or at least start that conversation now. So then if people follow up with a question, you know, if a funder follows up with a question during the grant review process, you can say, hey, yeah, we know this holding this event might seem strange, but we've already sought approval for it. You know, we're good to go. So just it's good to be keeping in mind some of those additional things during this time. And I think as funders, you know, people are definitely understanding that these are very challenging times on many levels, and it might be hard to plan and predict what the next 3-6 months might be like. Heck, right? Over the next like couple of weeks will look like. So I think, you know, people understand this, and it might be tough to, as you write a proposal and a grant project, you know, you might think that things could change drastically over the next few months. And so it's just good to have and to be thinking about backup plans. You know, I know, right, last summer parks were shut down, or some parks were shut down. And so, you know, how would you look to implement a project if, you know, things change? You have a backup project, would you hold it in a different space? You know, you're just seeking a different timeline. You know, these are good things to happen, to be mindful of.
Great, moving on. After describing your project, including the backup plans that Mike just mentioned, you will also have to answer this question. Why is the project needed, and why is it needed in your community specifically? Numbers and statistics will be helpful, but you can also share anecdotal and qualitative data, such as your group's experience and firsthand knowledge of your community's needs. For example, going back to the growing fresh produce example I just shared, the group can say, in my community, there is little access to fresh and nutritious food, and healthy food remains scarce and expensive. As a result, many neighborhood residents suffer from obesity and diabetes. Or you could also say, there is little access to green space in the community, with the closest park being a 20-minute walk. As a result, there is a lack of community spaces for neighbors to gather, and converting a lot into a garden would provide this free, open community space. You can see that these answers provide the specifics, the data, but also link back to the larger issues that are important and grant reviewers would like to see, such as obesity, health issues, as well as open space issues, which are pretty hot these days with COVID-19. And one project can be approached in different ways on this need question.
All right, so work plan. Here, you know, we want to speak to that, you know, groups are able to demonstrate to funders that you have the experience and or knowledge to carry out the project. So you're putting in thought about everything that's going in to execute and implement the project that you're asking money for. So this could look like a timeline. It could take other formats. but what has to happen before the project starts, right? Is there certain outreach you need to do in the community? Are there certain permits you need to secure? Do you need to schedule, rentals or get instructors or talk to certain people? Kind of what's the planning and the early parts of the early stages of the project. Then there's during, right? What has to happen during the events? Again, is it one day? Is it over multiple weeks? Who are the people that are involved? Who are maybe like participants? Are you outlining kind of like what has to happen, kind of like a run of show or something? And then after the event happens, is there any follow-up with the people who attended? Are you creating like mailing lists? Are people signing, doing sign-in sheets? Are you collecting sign-in sheets from the event, and you want to build your volunteer base? And so you want to follow up with people. Maybe you have to do certain report backs to funders. So just kind of mapping out the before, during, and after to your event. Often, some people might just say, oh, we were having an event in June 2021. And that's all it says. So from a funding perspective, it's tough to know like, well, what all has to happen. You say you want to hold this, multiple park cleanups or a park cleanup, but who do you have to talk to? How are you getting supplies there? How are you getting the people there? Like, you are applying as a group. What are the other members of your group doing? Do they have roles? So it's good just to like outline those. It doesn't need to be down to, the most specific detail. It's okay if you can't, but just to have a broad sense of like, well, this needs to happen for this project to occur is important to demonstrate.
Outreach. So to carry out a successful project, you would also need to have an effective outreach and community engagement plan, which is how will you get a word out about your project and involve other members of your community. So you would want to tell us how you will reach different members of your community as applicable to your project as possible. You may also want to dissect the audience into whether it is volunteers, event participants, or long-term group members. And you may want to design different strategies to engage them in the long term or in the short run. The go-to strategy is always to meet the community where they are, meaning that meeting in person, if they gather in community centers all the time, or make announcements at community board meetings. These days, you may want to try virtual platforms. There are also like community meetings that are happening online these days. You may want to reach out to the people who you want to reach. It also means to make your message more accessible. If you're targeting seniors, you may want to offer more old-fashioned word-of-mouth methods, but this is also a generalization. It's a stereotype, since you may have a group of tech-savvy senior residents on your block, and you may actually want to create a Facebook group or do other kinds of social media posting to attract them. So you will have to understand your community and target audience first. Translating into other languages can also be helpful, especially if you have a multilingual community, not only during the outreach portion, but also if you were to carry out your project and retain these group members in the long run, you would also want to consider how these multilingual residents will be able to get engaged in your projects. Make sure to include different kinds of outreach methods rather than relying on just a single one strategy. For example, you can mix up with flyering, meeting announcements, social media posting, so that you can make sure that you will reach as many people and as diverse a group as possible in your community for your project.
All right, budget, always the big one. So what are the items you need to carry out this project? Why are they important to your project? So we can't emphasize enough about being thorough and specific in putting your budget together. I've definitely seen a handful of applications out there where people might just say, oh, again, before the pandemic, right? $3,000 for a basketball tournament, and that's all it says. And I think from a funding perspective, that's extremely difficult to fund because there's not a whole lot of detail. There's not, you don't know what all the items are needed to go into supporting that that event, let's say. So really, breaking it out, we cannot emphasize enough. And sometimes researching the items you're looking to purchase is even more helpful, right? Especially during these times when funds are tight for maybe a lot of funders and they're trying to maximize their dollars across many projects. It's helpful to be specific. Hey, we know we want to get a bulletin board and we'll need, a recent example I saw was like $1,000. But if the bulletin board costs exactly $650 and you have a specific example, that's helpful to know. And so definitely demonstrating and including that information is helpful. And of course, prioritize items. I know in our application, we ask people to do that, but you might not get full funding. So if you're getting partial funding, what are the absolute crucial things that the group needs to carry out this project? So definitely prioritizing is really important. I think another thing to keep in mind are based on where you're applying for funding, what expenses do those funders allow, right? I know Dee and myself will talk about our own kind of allowable expenses later, and we differ in some of the things that we fund, but maybe one organization funds only tools, right? Maybe one organization does not fund any sort of outside consultant. So just doing that research and knowing what some places fund, what the funders allow is also really important. And then lastly, it's great to demonstrate resourcefulness. I know many people here are parts of groups. So are there ways to are there ways to get some items maybe through in-kind donations, or can you fundraise in a different, through a crowdfunding platform or through different means? So I think demonstrating that, that the things you're asking for are absolutely necessary and that you're doing the best you can to explore other opportunities and routes to help reduce costs. Oh, we're not asking for bottled water here because we know we can go to the local grocery store and we have a good relationship there, so they can give us bottled water. But beyond that, we really need this funding to support these aspects of the project. And so that shows the funder that you are, kind of assessing aspects within, almost like asset mapping in your community, right? Assessing where you have relationships or where you can kind of tap into certain resources, and then where do you actually need to go to funders to get support. And again, I think that just goes back in demonstrating in your application that the things you're asking for are even more important because you are exploring these other avenues.
So last but not least, we're going to talk about sustainability. As grant reviewers, we don't want to see the funds spent on the last project date in your timeline and then the group just call it done. We'd also hope to see how the project or the impact can be sustained. This can be included in your timeline, touched on in your need assessment question. Why is this important? Because it's going to be a long-lasting project, or included in your budget. Sustainability can really come in many different ways, either in the physical form or the more social, cultural, intangible form. That could be keeping a volunteer schedule to make sure that trash is picked up after a major cleanup. That can be the garden beds are maintained from time to time, the solar panels are replaced or batteries are replaced from time to time, produce are harvested, or that could also be register new members and sending follow-up emails after the events to make sure that you get the feedback and keep your volunteers and participants engaged so that they become long-term members of your group. Are there local agencies, community-based organizations, schools, elected officials that you can partner to help make the project more sustained? Therefore, if you want to make this project sustained and to make it happen, you would need to consider what's needed to ensure these efforts happen when you draft your plan, which is when you draft your grant application and plan out your project. Whether that's putting that piece into the volunteer engagement and delegating specific members who are in charge of maintaining sustainability, evaluating the result, and keeping everyone on top of what's needed to make the project sustained. That could also be reserving part of the budget for the sustainability and maintenance part. That could be getting equipment that can help with the maintenance part, or setting up the project in a way that will be a more efficient and sustainable project, like getting certain raised beds, seeds, or any kind of equipment that can help make your garden projects more sustainable. So we just talked a lot about the general grant writing practices, and we are going to put that into practice with the worksheet that Mara shared in the chat. We will be doing this breakout room of 3 to 4 people where you will be able to get to know each other more and share a project that you're excited about. So in this breakout room, please first introduce your name, group affiliation, neighborhood, and borough, which you've been doing amazingly in the chat, but also do that with your group members. And then please describe a project that you're working on or hope to get funding for using the worksheet. We will have this breakout session for about 20 minutes, so please be mindful of the time and let everyone get a chance to speak. And then we'll regroup in the large group to debrief or share what we learned from this breakout session.
And we're back.
Great, thanks everyone for sharing, and we'll try to address some of your questions and also the challenges you shared with community gardens being closed during COVID towards the end of this presentation. So definitely save them for later. And Mike and I will also be able to follow up with you if you have specific grant questions. So we'll start by introducing Citizens NYC's grant program. As I kind of gave you a preview during the introduction, we currently have 2 ongoing grant programs, which I want to start with our neighborhood business grants. Just in case it is helpful for some of you or your friends, family, and community members. So this is our new initiative during COVID-19, as we realized that a lot of small businesses in New York City are hit hard. So small businesses with this grant will receive up to $10,000 to maintain payroll and operations. We prioritize businesses owned by people of color, immigrants, women, and businesses that have minimal access to other kinds of resources. We also prioritize projects that modify their operations slightly in order to remain open during the pandemic, either in person or virtual services. The application is open and you can access it on our website. The application will be accepted on a rolling basis. And then I would like to focus on our all-in neighborhood grants. Grassroots organization responding to the immediate needs of struggling New Yorkers will receive unrestricted grants of up to $10,000 to open food pantries, distribute surgical masks, arrange elderly check-ins, or design other projects to meet their neighborhood's urgent needs amid the COVID-19 crisis. This grant program is a renaming of our Keystone Neighborhood Grants Program, which for decades has been awarding microgrants to resident-led groups to improve the quality of life in their neighborhoods. Grants support projects in arts, health, environmental justice, beautification, tenant rights, and more. Next slide, please. We've lifted some of the restrictions during the pandemic, but the general eligibility requirement is still for community groups that brings neighbors together to build stronger communities and address important community concerns. I want to highlight here that groups do not need 501c3 nonprofit status to apply for our grant, and staff nonprofit organizations are also welcome to apply for this grant. We also took out the group's budget restriction. If you know our grants from the past, there was a $40,000 budget requirement and $70,000, but those are out of the window. But I want to highlight that we prioritize groups that have a budget of $70,000 or less, meaning that we still prioritize smaller grassroots groups that have limited access to other kinds of funding. At the same time, public schools are exempt from the $70,000 criteria. So if you want to do a school project, that is also within the grant parameters. Next slide, please. After the pandemic hit, Citizens NYC surveyed our extensive grassroots network to understand New Yorkers' needs and the urgent priorities. We shifted our focus and funding priorities. So these are the priorities that we are focusing at the moment: financial assistance, youth and education initiatives, food, care for older adults, mental health care, physical health care, community and police relations, race and community relations. I know that today a lot of the groups that come here are community gardens, and we don't want you to think that this is not for community garden projects. As we discussed in my breakout session, the community gardeners want to start to build or rebuild their raised beds and rebuild their shed for their gardens. There's also a way for you to tie it back to these funding priorities. For example, by building the raised beds, you're gonna help getting more healthy produce to your community members, which in a way helps reduce food insecurity. Even though you may say that the garden produce cannot feed my entire community, but by getting the firsthand experience of growing food, harvesting food, community members really learn about healthy lifestyles, nutrition, and that is tied to the physical health care, mental health care, open space, green space. That is a space for community members together. So there is a way to tie it back to the funding priority. We would also love to see community gardens that bring community members together, either that's in the garden when it is safe, or if you bring people together virtually. Next slide, please. The application will launch in early February, so in the next 2 weeks on our website, and the notification will go out through our newsletter and social media channels, so please stay tuned. The deadline is April 9th, and then I also want to let you know that finalists will be invited to complete a supplemental application form before mid-April. So if you do apply, please be on the lookout for that supplemental form. Applicants will be notified of a grant decision by late May, and you'll be receiving your funds sometime in the summer. The grant projects from Citizens NYC should be implemented in the 5 boroughs of New York City and can be completed in 10 months. We understand that these are challenging times, so if in any case in the future you needed more time, you want to extend your project timeline, we are flexible, just stay in touch with us. And towards the end of your grant project, we would require a simple final report so that we understand how the project went, what are some of the feedback, and how would you like to continue your work. So I'll pause there and I'll answer more questions during Q&A.
Great, thanks, Dee. Again, what we spoke to earlier was in the presentation was just an opportunity to hear about important aspects that you should be considering for whether you're going to put together a 30-second pitch to a council member and some important details to remember, or you're writing a grant application. Before I jump into some of the resources we provide at Partnerships for Parks, I just want to say that Citizens Committee and Partnerships for Parks, we are geared toward, and GreenThumb of course as well, are geared towards supporting grassroots community groups through and through. So if you're not able to take away everything from this presentation, or you want to have follow-up questions that we don't touch on, or you want to, I heard someone earlier said they've never written a grant application before, like that's okay. We are here to support everyone across kind of that gamut of experience. So please, we want to be accessible to all of you, so do not hesitate to reach out and follow up. Just shifting quickly into our resources at Partnerships with Parks, financially speaking, I guess, our bread and butter grant is the Capacity Fund grant, and we have 2 deadlines this year, one coming up in March, and then one which is still to be determined, but will happen in the fall of 2021. So the exact deadline, and it's actually pretty cool seeing Dee's presentation. Our grant deadline is on March 22nd of 2021, and Citizens Committees is on April 9th. So there, if you are eligible for both grants, there's 2 opportunities right there that either you could maybe seek funding for, you have one project in mind and try to seek funding from both parties, or maybe you have 2 different projects, but basically being right back to back, while it might seem daunting, can actually be really helpful in, maybe putting forth a couple of different modified applications, and because you're already doing that work now, so that could actually be maybe helpful in that process. You're already doing the work to complete one. Maybe there's if you take a look at the applications, maybe there's opportunities you can submit to, and there you go. So again, we can help you in both, but just kind of a connection between those two, the timelines of those deadlines. So going back to our capacity fund grant, we do provide grants up to $3,000. We have a couple different applications. The projects application is the most flexible and most encompassing, so which we typically encourage most applicants to apply for, whether you're looking to purchase, maybe tools to do work in parks, or different park programs. But we also, for kind of more established community groups, offer a publication and website grant. So we have an in-house art director that can work with you and your community park group or garden group to produce like a brochure, publication, something a bit more physical to distribute. Or again, for those more established groups, we also do provide website support in creating a website if that's where you're at in kind of your group's development. So I wouldn't point brand new groups to the publication or website necessarily. The project's application is probably the best bet, but just kind of examples of the different applications we do offer. So when applying to the Partnerships for Parks Capacity Fund grant, the projects, because we are a joint program of the New York City Parks Department, the projects proposed must take place on land under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. So what that means is basically parks, playgrounds, community gardens, street trees, all street trees that you see out there kind of along the curb are under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department, as well as like green streets, sometimes those triangular or square or circular spaces as you're crossing streets you see. Those are all spaces that community groups and members can care for, and those are eligible spaces. If you have a space that you're not sure about, definitely reach out and ask us, and we're happy to clarify. We also understand that maybe you're working in a space that maybe isn't under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department, and we're still happy to be a resource, point you in the direction of Citizens Committee or other fundraising opportunities. Or like Russell had mentioned earlier when in the group conversation last year in 2020, our parent organization, City Parks Foundation, had the NYC Green Fund, which actually was a rapid response grant that was open to all kind of open spaces. So it didn't have to just be under the parks jurisdiction. So I am unsure as of this very moment if there will be a second round, but we are hoping. So keep an eye out this summer. I guess I forgot to add it into the notes here, but we're hoping something will come this summer in that sense. So we'll definitely be connecting with the Citizens Committee and GreenThumb if that does roll out to make sure that goes out wide. But the Capacity Fund grant definitely happening on March 22nd, 2021. And just kind of wrapping up there, what's important about this grant is that the project you're asking for, you're putting forth, is helping your group, kind of in some way. So it's not just a simple one-off, but you're helping. The project is meant to build the capacity of your group to maybe engage more people, maybe build, grow more food in your space. So you kind of have to tie it to a larger goal, and we're happy to kind of talk with you if you're kind of trying to figure out how best to frame it. And as Dee mentioned, I think a really great thing that we both do, Partnerships with Parks and Citizens Committee, again, as I said, supporting the grassroots groups. You do not need to be a nonprofit to apply. You can be for our grant, but is not required. So it could be a group of 2 or 3 of you coming together with an idea and proposing a project for a park or open space, again, under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. So it is very flexible in that way. Real quick, we don't fund individuals. We don't fund kind of electronic equipment like printers or computers. We don't fund fundraisers. So you can't use our grant then to try to make more money off of. So you can't buy t-shirts with it and then sell those t-shirts. We don't fund local travel, no staff time or like overhead costs like rent or general liability insurance or utilities. But we have supported, again, consultants or educators or internships in the past. So again, a lot of detail here. Just reach out with questions. We're happy to answer them. We hold individual consultations and whatnot. So we provide a host both, and we're actually about to dive into that in a second, but we both provide a host of support through the grant process. So we just went through 2 different funding opportunities. These are not the only ones out there, but again, we're geared to the grassroots groups. So we just wanted to go over real quick, just maybe the quick differences, because again, some of this can be confusing. It's a lot of information at once. So from the Partnerships for Parks side, in summary, for our budget, again, up to $3,000. You don't have to have like, there's no like particular budget limitation. If you're contracting out to educators or contractors, there is no stipend limit or anything like that. So it's pretty open-ended there. I mentioned that you don't need to be a nonprofit to apply, but you might ask, well, if I receive a grant, what happens? How do I access those funds if I'm not a nonprofit? Well, through our parent organization, City Parks Foundation, we offer to hold the grant for you during the duration if needed. So you could access the funds through us, through like reimbursements or through invoices. So I can go in much greater detail separately about that, but that's one way to help groups receiving grants from us. Again, the work needs to be done on property under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. So again, street trees, community gardens, parks, playgrounds, green streets, and we will have 2 cycles this year.
Great. So just to cover some of what Mike and I just mentioned, we don't have a budget limitation for our all-in neighborhood grants, but we do prioritize groups with smaller budget, meaning under $17,000. We don't have a parent organization, so we don't offer fiscal sponsorship. But from some past grantee partners of Citizens NYC, you might realize that you have to either get a group bank account from a credit union or a local bank, which we can support with the process. We're getting 501c3 fiscal sponsorship from a nonprofit organization. But during the pandemic, we also lifted our restrictions, meaning that now you can have the funds sent to your individual bank accounts. Let's say that you are the garden leader and you want the money sent to your bank account, that is okay, as long as you provide a secondary contact. So meaning another garden member, your treasurer or your secretary or just another group member, and we would need to retrieve a copy of confirmation from the secondary contact to make sure that the funds was received in the right amount and spent accordingly. Our projects are not limited to New York City Parks properties. So across the 5 boroughs, I also saw that there was a question from Robin that it is the 5 boroughs and the project should be completed within 10 months instead of 20 months. So like all 5 boroughs. Let me know if you have more questions on that. And there is only 1 grant cycle for it. And kind of catching up on some of the other questions I received during this meeting, understanding that we support many smaller grassroots groups or those that are writing their first grant applications this time, we try to make our applications as accessible as possible. So you won't necessarily need to hire a third-party grant writer. We don't judge the applications by grammar, writing, and all of that. So try to be creative and bring together community members, group members, just write it out in the way that makes sense for you. Don't worry too much about the writing quality itself, because we understand that you are not professional grant writers. We also offer grant information sessions. So that's when we go deep into the eligibility requirements for a specific grant program, for example, the all-in neighborhood grants, and we go through the application form step by step. So today we covered the different aspects like about your group, need assessment, et cetera, et cetera. With that info session specifically, we'll actually look at the specific questions for the specific grant program. So if you have any questions, you can ask us during the orientation, which will be a really great opportunity, especially for those who are writing grants for the first time. We've shifted our grant priorities and also shifted the applications a bit, as some of you who are familiar with us. Some of this might look new, so I'd also suggest you take a look at the, either attend the orientations or take a look at the fuller explanation on the website before you take a stab at the application. We partner with elected officials on these info sessions, and we'll be posting the event on our website, as well as newsletter and social media channels. We'll also have the orientation video on the website. So if you have any questions, go to one of the orientations and connect with us one-on-one if you want to help us brainstorm your ideas or troubleshoot for your application form, or just write a project description.
Great, thanks, Dee. So yeah, just building off of that, and as we've touched on kind of throughout the presentation, we are here to support you through this grant funding process or through, other processes, but, Partnerships for Parks, we provide, one-on-one, phone conversations or Zoom calls or whatever is preferable for you. We hold public workshops. We've done rough draft reviews in the past. We hold public trainings and do individual coaching and provide other support and assistance. So, you have questions, please, definitely direct them our way.
Yeah, kind of similar to what Mike explained, we offer these one-on-one consultations, project planning assistance, meaning that if it's not a grant project, but if you want to start a block association, form a garden structure, write the mission statement or bylaws for your local group, you can also come to us and we'll help you brainstorm ideas, but also serve as a sounding board. We also have a great network of community leaders and partners. We can direct you to those resources as well. I also want to mention the Citizens NYC Live series, which I highlighted at the beginning, which is a really great way to get connected with us, to see what's happening at Citizens NYC, but also what's happening at other community leaders and grantee and other partnering organizations. We'd also love to promote and elevate the voice of our grantee partners and community leaders. So if you have a story of your group, of yourself, of your neighbor that you think should be shared with more people, definitely share that with us. And if you have events that you would like to be promoted, we'd also love to help with that as
well. And just wanted to, as we mentioned that, right, I mean, some of our resources are one option, but there's other funding opportunities out there as well. The New York Restoration Project has their Gardens for the City program that's rolling. So definitely look into that for some of those maybe structural needs or infrastructural garden pieces. And then IOB, which stands for In Our Backyards, is a crowdfunding platform. Provides, again, is geared to the grassroots groups. There are a lot of crowdfunding platforms out there. Crowdfunding is when you solicit donations from your network and they direct it to an online platform. So like GoFundMe, Indiegogo, all those different types. There's tons out there. You maybe have heard and seen them. But IOB is really supportive and again, provides a lot of the coaching and guidance through what it takes to implement a campaign. So they're wonderful and also have the lowest fees. So I don't work for them, but I definitely encourage you to check them out because they're fantastic. And so they also have their own kind of rolling deadlines for some of their different, they also have a matching program. So based on the neighborhood you live in, sometimes they have neighborhood matching programs where you raise $1 and it gets matched. So take a look at some of their programs as well.
So if you are a member of a registered GreenThumb garden, you can also get things from us, and it can sometimes look good in your grant applications to say, hey, we're redoing all of our beds, we're getting the soil and lumber from GreenThumb, but we need funding to buy plants. You no longer have to come to a workshop to ask your outreach coordinator for supplies. You can just email your outreach coordinator, tell them what you need. If you have quantities in mind, that is super helpful. There's a guide in the GreenThumb handbook that kind of describes if you're building, 10 raised beds, how much soil is that? How much soil should you ask for? So you can check the GreenThumb handbook for that, but your outreach coordinator can help you. And then we have our annual distributions, plants and supplies in the spring, and then things like salt and snow shovels in the fall. With COVID, these are changing a bit. We're doing direct deliveries to gardens again, so stay tuned for that. You'll be hearing from your outreach coordinator directly. And then in non-pandemic times, if you attend workshops in person, you can often get supplies at the workshops. So sometimes we'll do a workshop on roses, and then we'll give away rose plants and pruners, or books, things like that. But we're not doing those, until it's safe to do so. And then I think that brings us to Q&A. I just want to be mindful, we only have 5 minutes left. So let's leave this page up because there was a question in the chat about contact info. So folks can write that down. A couple questions, Mike, for you. Could the capacity fund grants be used for a redo of a website to be more user-friendly?
Yes. So I don't want to complicate things too much, but people can either apply to work with our art director for their an existing, for like maybe a new website, or they could also apply for like general websites, like services through the project's application. So you can kind of ask for that in a couple different ways, but we have supported, people don't have to work with us on a website. They can, source it to other people. So definitely we'll have a separate webinar more in depth about the website and publication support in early March. So we'll definitely blast that information out. But yes, happy to answer those questions separately, but yes, to answer the question.
Great, thank you. And then someone was surprised to hear that street trees are under the jurisdiction of NYC Parks. Could an individual or building of tenants apply to improve the state of a tree or trees in front of their building? Or would that scale be too small for these types of grants, i.e. plant flowers in the bed, add more plants, clean up, etc.? Yeah,
well, hopefully, love is hearing this, maybe stoke some of those ideas. Yeah, that's great. As I mentioned, that people can apply, you could just form to be a brand new group all of a sudden. Yeah, maybe you are a part of a building and you're kind of a number of people there. But yes, there are plenty of people out there in New York City who care for street trees, maybe building tree guards or buying tree guards or planting flowers or caring for the trees to help make sure they live for a long time. And there's a whole separate division in the Parks Department that does support street tree care. So our funding can contribute to that. We can guide you and direct you in the right way. But yes, exactly. You could be part of a building and be like, oh, there's 7 trees on our block and we'd love to get involved. Yes, you could apply for a grant to care for the street trees in that way. But we encourage you to look up, they're called NYC Parks Stewardship, and they provide a lot of support for street tree care. So definitely look into them for additional resources as well.
Thanks. And then the last question is, I think you covered it, but just to clarify, if a group has a fiscal sponsor, would you send the funds just directly to the fiscal sponsor? Yeah, so Dee covered it beautifully on her end. I did not on my end. So we were just saying, I just spoke to only people who don't have a group bank account. But right, if you have a group bank account, we can cut that check to your group. If you are a nonprofit, we would cut that check to your nonprofit. If you have your own fiscal sponsor, we would cut that check to them. Or if you have none of those and want us to hold the funds, we can do so. Awesome. Okay, last question. Has the Citizens Committee for NYC Love Your Block grant program been discontinued?
Yes, unfortunately, we discontinued that program for this year. We will return to discuss with our partner the next year. So I would encourage you to look at the All-in Neighborhood grants for projects that you would originally apply for Love Your Block. The only downside is that Love Your Block comes with the expedited city services, which we know that are pretty crucial, but city agencies are also running tight on budgets and staff, so we are not doing that program for this grant year. So if you are looking for funding specifically, I would direct you to the All-in Neighborhood grants.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dee. Thank you so much, Mike. We are so grateful to have you guys as partners for community gardens in New York City. This was a super informative and amazing webinar. I'm going to pause the recording and then open it up if folks want to wave goodbye.